Hi. Following my series of videos on the differences to be found flying in the UK compared to Europe, which was directed at European pilots visiting us in the UK, I've been asked to produce an equivalent video on how general aviation, both VFR and IFR, works in Europe, and highlighting some of the major differences in real-world operations between European countries. I agreed to do this thinking it would be very straightforward. After all, every European country is a member of EASA and has signed up to SERA, the Standardized European Rules of the Air. So every country in Europe is going to be the same, right? But the next day, I was flying across Belgium VFR, and I noticed that every VFR aircraft was being told the same thing: military is active. And I realized that I really didn't know what that meant. The words are straightforward, of course. The Belgian Air Force is awake and doing stuff. But what did that mean for me? What was the call to action? What must I or should I do or not do? Why was it so important that everyone needed to be told? I had no idea. I've since asked ChatGPT if the same expression is used anywhere else in Europe, and it couldn't find any formal reference. There's no more knowledgeable community on the subject of travelling long distances in light aircraft across Europe than the PPLIR forum. So I posed a series of 70 questions asking people from different countries for their local knowledge and experience, and I received full responses for 20 countries. Thank you, guys. It was immediately clear that things vary much more than I'd thought. Every single one of those 70 questions raised national differences. That's 1,400 potential answers to be analysed. I'm going now to give a small number of examples of what I mean before moving on to what I suggest to make this issue easier for everyone. The first domain I looked at was the use of language. Generally, English is used by all European states, but a quick scan of the AIPs shows considerable variation. The following specify that only English may be used: Austria, Belgium, Croatia, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Hungary, Latvia, North Macedonia, Malta, Moldova, the Netherlands, Romania, and of course Ireland and the UK. In Albania and Norway, English must be used except in exceptional or emergency situations, while in Slovenia, Slovenian may be used in an emergency and at any time when VFR. In Bulgaria, Poland, and Serbia and Montenegro, English must be used in controlled airspace and main airports, English or local language outside. Then, in Bosnia, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Greece, Greenland, Lithuania, Slovakia, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, and Turkey, either English or local language or languages may be used interchangeably without conditions. In Germany and Portugal, the language to be used is published in the AIP for each station, though Germany do say that it's normally English. In France, it can be French or English, except where French only is indicated on aeronautical charts. In Iceland, English is used for international flights. Domestic flights may use Icelandic. And finally, Italy. Dear Italy makes no comment in the AIP, but I think it's our experience that controllers speak poor English and local airfields mainly only Italian. I must say, I was surprised to find so much variation between countries of common heritage, such as ex-Yugoslavia, the Baltics, and Czechoslovakia. Anyway, the point is, as it will be for the next couple of things I talk about, that there are considerable variations and it will be difficult to remember the rules for each country. In this case, the general approach will be to use English for any foreign IFR and VFR when in contact with an air traffic controller or FISO. It's worth noting that pilots must have at least ICAO English Level 4 to fly internationally. However, be aware that smaller airfields may only offer a basic air-ground radio service and/or expect traffic calls in the local language. The next example I'm going to talk about is flight outside controlled airspace and how Flight Information Service, FIS, works. Again, not because I expect you to remember every detail, but to illustrate the variability. For example, the French FIS is well known for granting clearances through a series of upcoming Class D zones, and this is also common in Greece. whereas in Denmark and the UK it never happens. You have to be transferred to the zone controller. In other places, such as Belgium and Ireland, they will occasionally exercise delegated authority, but usually hand you over. Whereas in Germany, Hungary and the Baltic states, they might get a clearance for you and relay it to you while keeping you on their frequency. Under SERA, FIS is a non-mandatory advisory service in Class G. However, the practical application varies from talk if you want to mandatory for specific routes. The UK is the most distinct outlier. Instead of a single information service, they offer basic traffic, deconfliction and procedural services. But I've covered that in detail in the videos about flying in the UK, so I won't repeat myself here. The links to the UK videos are in the description. In Portugal, there are mandatory VFR tunnels. While FIS is optional in most of Europe's Class G, Portugal makes it mandatory in specific high-traffic corridors. VFR flights through the Lisbon, Porto or Faro tunnels must submit a flight plan, maintain two-way radio contact with FIS and keep their transponder on mode Charlie. Again, there's one place in the UK with a similar but different construct, the North West Transit Corridor, formerly known as the Manchester Low-Level Route, but again I covered that in the UK videos. And in Spain, the reality is that FIS may as well not exist. A frequency is published, but usually no one answers. But while we're talking about examples of differences, let's look at the availability of IFR in uncontrolled airspace. The legality of flying IFR without an ATC clearance in Class G is one of the biggest gotchas for pilots crossing borders. According to ICAO airspace classifications, EASA and SERA, IFR is available in Class G. If only it were that simple. Again, I can only take a few examples. In the UK, Ireland, France, Denmark, Sweden and Norway, it is permitted and practical, but in France, a flight plan is mandatory and pilots should maintain contact with the local FIS. And the Netherlands and Belgium effectively restrict en route IFR in Class G by requiring both the flight plan and active coordination and clearance from ATC to ensure separation. I'm told that in Belgium you can continue IFR outside controlled airspace only if you started it inside, but en route flight is impractical because of altitude limitations in Class G. In Hungary, if you're not on an IFR arrival or departure, it's only permitted above 4,000 feet in Class G, and it's not common, but it is theoretically possible. In Germany and Bosnia, it's effectively not permitted. So, variation all over the place. Let's talk briefly about the VFR-IFR transition and when IFR starts if you're departing an airfield without IFR procedures, which I will accordingly call a VFR airfield, and then flying en route under IFR, whether inside or outside controlled airspace. Some countries, such as Germany, Austria and Switzerland, require a VFR departure from a VFR airfield, followed by a specific clearance to change to IFR, and that means, of course, remaining VMC. While it's possible that some pilots claim to be VFR when their flight conditions are not strictly VMC, that's not our concern right now. I'm talking about the rules and assuming that pilots follow the rules. Some countries, such as the UK, Denmark, Finland, Estonia, Hungary and France, specifically allow departure from a VFR airfield on an IFR plan, though most, except the UK, require a telephone clearance before takeoff. If joining controlled airspace, a clearance to join before entry is a requirement in all countries, normally on the radio once in the air, though this can be obtained on the ground before takeoff under some circumstances and in some countries. When leaving the IFR environment and landing at an airfield without IFR procedures, the SERA standard is that only the pilot may cancel IFR and must do so only when they can continue to their destination under VFR, but the practicalities vary in different countries. In Germany and Switzerland, a specific ZFPL must be filed with a defining waypoint for transitioning from VFR to IFR. Only the pilot can cancel IFR when in VMC, though they'll often be prompted to do so by ATC. Cancelling IFR does not close the flight plan, it must be closed after landing by ATC or on the phone. In France, Spain, Austria, Ireland and the UK, pilots can continue IFR until after landing, and it's required to close the flight plan to avoid potentially triggering search and rescue operations. In Norway and Italy, for example, the pilot in command must contact ATC to inform them of their intention to switch from IFR to VFR, and they have the final responsibility for maintaining VFR conditions. Although it's strictly correct to file a Y plan, the pilot can file I and elect to change to VFR, but that has to be explicit. And one last example, danger areas. Do we need permission to enter them? This seems to be quite a contentious subject. Generally, entry into danger areas, particularly active danger areas, is discouraged but not prohibited. There are prohibitions from entering some French danger areas, but they're documented. Generally, the European rule is that there's no direct prohibition on entering danger areas, but if, by doing so, you cause danger or disruption, you can be held liable for the consequences, such as paying for the cost of the military sending their jets home to fly another day. But while the UK AIP prohibits entry only into danger areas with local bylaws documented in the AIP, it doesn't prohibit entry to the rest. The same is true of the Informal Skyway Code. However, the UK still takes enforcement action against anyone who enters any danger area, even if it's permitted. We in the UK just know that, but I simply don't understand how a foreign pilot is supposed to know. Because the UK takes enforcement action against pilots performing apparently legal crossings without accessible documentation or legal basis, I just don't know what to say about other countries, which leads me on to the main thrust of this video. Although ICAO, EASA and SERA rules are supposed to bring conformity to the whole continent, they simply don't, and there are just too many exceptions, variations and local rules and practices, which may be documented or undocumented, for the average touring pilot to be able to get a knowledge and understanding of each country. That may be okay if you only ever go to a few countries, but if, like me, you like to sweep across the whole of Europe, going where you fancy, following the weather or events that you hear about, without a matter planning and preparation, you're in a difficult position. But these days, we have the benefit of AI tools to help us get through this maze, and that's exactly what I recommend. So I've been doing a little research on your behalf. I've limited my research to ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, and Copilot. Of course, there are others, but these seem to be the four heavy lifters. To be fair, the only one of these that I pay for is ChatGPT, so it's possible that my results from there are a little enhanced. But generally, I've asked the same question of each of them and compared the quality of the answer. I always specify that I want the AI bot to quote its sources, whether AIP, law, or officially produced guides, and I strongly recommend that you do the same, so that if there's any doubt, you can check the source. All of them I've sent to thinking mode, or its equivalent. I'll give you some examples, but I can generalize to say that Claude has the most frustrating user interface by a long way, and its answers are not great. Copilot Chat seems to be a rather different tool in that it seeks context from the web page you're on rather than starting the question afresh. But I think that that's what it's designed to do. It's based on the same underlying model as ChatGPT, but it appears to use a different version or configuration. So the answers can differ from ChatGPT's. My testing of Copilot Chat suggests it gives shorter, less thought out answers. ChatGPT gives rather shorter answers and seems to give a little more opinion around the subject than the others. You'll see an example in a minute. However, it's a little unfair as I've been a paid-up user of ChatGPT for some time and I've accordingly trained it on my preference of writing style and my preference for succinct answers. Gemini is generally very good and perfectly usable and gives well-researched answers in an approachable style, but it has the reputation of fantasizing more than the others and will state its fantasies with as much confidence as its facts, but I've seen no evidence of this. Based on the limited testing I've done for this video, Gemini gets my vote. Right, enough ill-informed opinion from me. Let's look at some examples. I'll start with the question of whether you can reasonably fly IFR in Class G airspace. Claude says that Class G IFR is permissible only in UK and Ireland, with a prohibition in Germany and practical impossibility elsewhere. Gemini is a little more expansive and correct, highlighting different countries and giving chapter and verse from a number of AIPs. ChatGPT gives a much narrower answer, correct as far as it goes, but only covering 3 countries. Copilot similarly gives a broadly correct answer, which is light on detail and narrow in scope. So, without a doubt, Gemini wins that comparison. Let's take one more example, a much more specific and directed questions. What is to stop me flying into a danger area in Germany? Give me references to the laws and procedures. Let's start with the least helpful answer, which is Copilot Chat. Instead of looking at danger areas as I requested, it discusses restricted areas, so forget that. Claude tries a bit harder, but gets it largely wrong. It looks at both restricted and danger areas, but then goes on to say that entry to danger areas is at the pilot's discretion without legal consequence. ChatGPT is rather more helpful, hinting at legal consequences of penetration. And finally, again, my vote for the most helpful and factual answer goes to Gemini, which lays out the law and then describes in some detail the potential consequences of penetration. So, to summarise, in my opinion, it's impossible to know the rules for every country across Europe. My recommendation is to start using AI to help navigate these rules. As of early 2026, Gemini appears to give the best answers for this kind of question, followed by ChatGPT. But this space is evolving quickly. What works best today may change, so it's worth trying different tools as they improve. We think AI will become increasingly valuable for this kind of research, but whichever tool you use, it's important to check the source material it gives you. However, we've seen that AI cannot necessarily be relied on for a full and complete answer. Come and talk to your fellow members on the PPL IR Europe Forum, who have a vast experience of flying around Europe. Together we go further. I hope that helps. See you in the next video.